This is June 10th, 2025. My name is Robert Rowe. I'm the interviewer, and our guest today is Rebecca Cartmell. Rebecca, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Robert?
Doing fine, thank you. Let's start off. Give us a little bit about, birthday, your childhood, how you grew up.
Okay.
A little bit of that.
I'll try. Well, you brought up birthday. My mother always said that she watched Peter Pan and then walked up the alley to the hospital after Peter Pan to Hayeswood Hospital, which was right behind our house, literally one block up, and had me on November 13th, 1956. And the other thing she tells everybody, always told all my life, was that it was the night of the Texaco fire, which the Russell Texaco on Lexington Street, major fire, and she said, I stood at the window and watched the fire, the window of the hospital. And it wasn't until I was probably 18 or 19, I saw a 1950, and she always said it was Friday the 13th. That was the other thing. You were born on Friday the 13th.
Boy, you were just born under a lucky star, weren't you?
Yes, and the Texaco fire. Well, then I found a 56 calendar, and the 13th was on a Tuesday. So
then the crops failed.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I think probably it was the Texaco fire. That can be verified one way. Or she was still in the hospital, and she probably was, because, you stayed forever then. Yeah. Not anymore. But so I was born there. My father delivered me.
Oh, that's cool.
And he was 54 years old when I was born, which is kind of interesting. He didn't seem old to me ever. You know what I mean? He was just my dad. But anyway, I grew up under the of Hayeswood Hospital. Hayeswood Hospital was overlooking our house, and on West 3rd Street. And believe it or not, there were a lot of kids there then, kind of the same age. The Fords were next door. The Hargets were across the street and down the street. Two different sets of Hargets who were first cousins, and so we had a lot of kids around to play with, and there were a lot of older people on the block also, but they were I went to everybody's house. I knew everybody on the block and behind me.
And that was back in the day when you could actually do that.
Yes, that's what I was going to say, because my daughter, who also grew up here in the 90s, that was not the case. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Not so many people to visit and not so many kids. But really... a lot of kids. That's the other thing I will tell you. I was telling this story the other day at what I call Rabbit Hole. When the schools integrated, which in my case, it was when I was in 2nd grade. That was our first year of having black kids in with us. And I can remember the first day of walking to 1st District School, which I walked there every day, with my mom in 2nd grade. Debbie Berry and her mother were walking by, and we became best friends, and were really best friends, really good friends all our lives.
Okay, so it was, they did integration, but you still had the 6th Ward, first...
Yes.
Okay.
6th Ward, 1st District, Woodley, Forest Avenue, those were all of the downtown schools, I think. And... yeah, different kids. Debbie lived on 5th Street, and she went to 1st District, and a lot of kids who lived in Debbie lived on 5th Street. A lot of kids on what is now called Pfister Alley or Pfister Avenue. I don't know. It's right up here behind what I call the old jail. Yeah, I'm pointing as if,
Yes.
But anyway.
We know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Anyway, a lot of neighborhood kids at 1st District. So I went there for 4 years.
Okay, as a kid, What did you do before electronics, before phones?
We rode our bikes a lot. We played hopscotch. We had roller skates the kind with the little metal wheels that strapped onto your shoe. I still have mine, by the way.
And you had the key.
And we had the key, exactly. And we had great sidewalks on my street. And I can remember, I love going down to the Methodist church because their sidewalk was really good for skating. We played Army. We played, which is, I don't know how we got into that, but we did. I mean, almost all girls. And I think it was all girls for me.
So did the girls pretty much play with the girls, the boys with the boys?
I would say kind of yes.
Because Ron Bailey talked about the main thing he remembered about growing up was playing marbles. And you had championship marble players.
Yes. And we did not play marbles, but I've heard Holton and David talk about it. And they remember going to Beechwood Park and doing that. But we played a lot in the alleys and across the street, like behind the Bank of Maysville. Big parking lot back there. We played Army a lot back there. And some of that I know I got from Holton and David, who were in military school, so I heard about commanders and captains and majors. I didn't know what they were, but you know,
but you're
this and I'll be this. And anyway, so that was a lot of things. I will tell you, yesterday, it's funny you brought this up, Bob Savage, who is Kay Browning's brother, who was David's age, but grew up right down the street. He was another kid on the street. I ran into him yesterday, and he said, you know, I have to apologize to you. And I was like, what? I said, why? He said, for the water balloon. They were on our third floor, and they were saying, hey, Rebecca, catch this. And he said, you were down there going, you know, with smiling, and it hit you right in the face. I told him, I said, I'm scarred for life. But anyway, I had forgotten it, but now I'm worried about it. No. Anyway, that was something that happened.
I'll just see, my family lived on Kentucky Street.
Oh,
and when my sister was born, Mom and Dad were carrying her to Central Methodist Church and dropped her head first into a snowbank.
And?
It explains my sister.
Okay, that explains everything. Okay.
Yes.
And that's something you go ahead.
No, I want to, because and we're going to get into this a little bit more, but you have always, for as long as I've known you, been a champion of public causes, of public service. Did that start when you were young? Was that something your parents instilled in you?
I think probably my parents instilled it in me. You know, one of the things is animals. You know, I always loved animals, and we always had a lot of animals, and were taught to treat them well. And it's funny, when I was cleaning out my grandmother's house, I found the thing where she and her first cousin, who was Jessie Yancey, who was the first superintendent of schools, first woman superintendent of schools here, started the first Humane Society, which I didn't know.
Oh, wow.
I did know that my mother was involved in one. You know, there have been several iterations of the Mason County Humane Society, and now it's Humane Society of Buffalo Trace. But it is funny. So that is one. But my mother and father both were always involved in everything. I mean, Mom took us to, we were highly involved in Mason Manor. We went to Minerva to can food for Mason Manor. I mean, she took me with her.
Right.
Always helping somebody. And at that time, we didn't have the social service network that we have now. They did have social workers who took care of kids who needed homes and needed to be removed or whatever. And Mom was very involved in that. And there are several people around to this day that she placed. She was not a paid social worker, but she was able to make things happen. So that's probably that, and historic preservation. You know, that was a huge thing. There's so many things.
and I want to get into those.
Okay.
I'm still waiting for the master list on it.
Okay.
But let's talk about your family and politics.
Okay.
Because 3 generations, or does it go back further?
It goes back further, I think. My grandfather, well, you got my grandmother. That's a really good question. I have to think for a second if there was.
Okay, your grandmother, Rebecca Horde.
Right, was mayor when I was really little, and just that is something too that I would say shaped me. You know, when people talk about women not being in my family, the women were the ones. I mean, not my dad was very accomplished and whatever, but
Right.
but I never thought that, oh, that's something that a woman can do that. Of course, a woman can do that. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
But that's a really good point. And when my mother ran for mayor, I didn't see that coming. I was, I think, living in Louisville at the time, and I was like, oh, okay. You know, I just didn't know. But she was chairman of the planning and zoning. She was very involved in city affairs even before she was mayor. You know?
And is it safe to say that one of your mother's pet projects was beautification of the area? Because I remember her being so pro, like trees along Coughlin Boulevard and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. She was very pro tree, and that the group called Relief, I think it was called. It was
RELEAF.
Yeah. I think that was started. I'm not saying she started it, but she was very interested in trees and having succession planning for trees. You know, if you're going to take one down, have a plan to replace it, or have already planted something that will replace that tree.
Right.
So she was always involved in that and anything, keeping things as historically correct as possible. And I will tell you, you know, on our street, the Bank of Maysville.
Oldest bank in Kentucky.
That's right, but it was, you know, the drive-in was a beautiful mansion.
Yes.
It was the Everett Mansion, which would remind you of the Fee House up here, or the January House, very similar. And that about killed her. And the next thing, I know I'm ended up talking about her. The other thing that I remember hearing a lot about was the houses on Front Street, urban renewal, and not just the houses, everything that was removed. And we owned one of those houses. It was where the Cartmells lived, and it was she lost. She took it to the state Supreme Court and lost, but there is a diorama. There's a miniature. It's not a miniature, but there is a diorama here at the museum of the houses. And now everybody looks back and like, why did we do that? For parking lots that are basically now empty.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but
I barely remember Front Street, and I just thought it was so cool.
Yes.
But of course, I guess with the flood wall coming up, you were pretty much right out your front door and boom, bump your nose on the flood wall.
That's true. But of course, I'm pro flood wall, and I know we differ in that. But anyway.
I didn't say tear it down.
Anyway, I do agree that is. But you know, there are a couple of young people who have bought houses down. The few that are left in there.
Right.
My mother. I'm back to my mother here. But my mother was born in a house that's still standing down there. But anyway.
So tell me about your mother.
No, I just
sounds like remember.
A psych. Well, basically, what I'm going to say is not about my mother, but we've been here a long time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Her family before and my father's family had a Patrick Henry land grant for their farm out on Tuckahoe. So we've been here for a really long time. I don't know if it's how many generations. I don't know if it's 7. I'd have to look back on that too. One thing that hurts us is my father was so old when he got married. You know what I mean? We lost a generation in there.
Yeah.
What could have been a generation. Not really, but...
Well, I do want to ask something. You know I'm going to ask about your mother.
Uh-huh.
Because she was famous nationally.
Oh, yes.
And I'll say definitely ahead of the curve when she came out pro marijuana.
Yes, yes. And that was, she was standing up for somebody who had been put in jail for having a marijuana plant in their kitchen window, basically, as I recall. And she just thought that was ridiculous, and that, people have been smoking pot for years, and it should be legalized. And
now this was what, mid-'80s?
I would say yes. I think my dad died in 82, and I think it was after that. So I'd say mid-'80s, yes. Well, she was mayor then, too. So that probably maybe 86, maybe.
I said it definitely got her a lot of national coverage.
Yes, it did. It did.
And now, 40 years later, people are finally catching up.
Yes. And I will tell you, with so many things that she said, that's one big one, but just so many things that she said that have come true. She really was ahead of her time. That's what I will say.
Can you think of some other ones?
I
would say to put you on the spot, but this whole thing I'm putting you on the spot.
There have been many things over the years that I've said, oh, Mom said that, 40 years ago. That guy, seriously. Now coming up with something, even things things that might sound true. She made it her business to be, I'm going to call it an expert. Maybe she wasn't, to know about that.
Right.
To the point of, I can remember being upset about a 2-inch water line going into Washington, and that needs to be a 6-inch water line. And that has come, that has come, whatever, I'm using those. That has come true. Those things have come true. And
I would say stuff like that. I mean, that's consequential. Not a lot of people would think of it, but
that's it. She really made it her to be educated on, and this is before she was mayor. I mean, she wanted everybody to do the right thing first, instead of, we can fix it, the AA. She wanted it to be a limited access, and she said they're going to regret this, and here we are.
yes.
That was something. Solid waste and land. She got really big on that. I remember when my daughter when Ellen was born. My mom was not driving at that point. She had somebody helping her, and that person brought her to the hospital in Louisville to see the baby and me. And the person who drove her said, "She's in a good mood. She hadn't mentioned solid waste or marijuana one time today." So, like I said, she just...
Like I said, things you normally wouldn't think of. The landfill, I guess about that time, it was located at the end of number 10 at the end of town,
Right.
past the cemetery.
Yes.
And the state kept penalizing Maysville for not having everything up to code.
Right.
And I remember how hard Buddy Golenstein, when he was judge executive, had fought for making sure we were up to spec and
Right, doing the right thing with solid waste, and not putting the wrong things into and the environment. I mean, she was, and I guess that's where some of I just clean water, all those things.
And it's not glamorous stuff that you think about, but it is vital. It's part of the underpinnings of what makes a city work.
Yes. And she would go to national conferences. This is not necessarily while she was mayor. I mean, I remember growing up with her. She went to the White House Conference on Children. She was just trying to think of all the things. She was the founder. We're talking all about her. This is what's funny about it. The founder of Comprehend, one of the original American Red Cross ladies here. She was in charge of all the blood drives. And what's interesting, when she died, there's all this. She kept everything, and I do the same thing. But I was like, this Comprehend stuff. I don't want this and this red. And now look, now I'm on the board of Comprehend. Just funny how, at the time I didn't think it would be important to me, and it has become very important. So,
And I was going to mention the Red Cross
yes,
because when the night the Cox building burned,
yes, yes.
I was at the Opera Theater. We were doing a chamber sponsored
Uh huh.
event, and I heard, got a text that
Yes.
the Cox building was on fire, and I ran up here, and of
Hmm.
course you beat the fire department up here with waters and anything to help support the first
Right,
responders.
right. And yeah, it's a big part of what the Red Cross does. Help the disaster victim, but also support the first responders. So yeah,
So I'll go for the list now.
okay,
Tell me about the different things that you have been involved with,
okay,
currently involved with,
okay.
what you're planning for the future being
Well, now
involved
that
with.
that I don't know. Okay, so as a child, this was something that was a big part of, you know, early and then high school, and was the Children of the American Revolution, which my mother made sure I was in that. Of course, it's the children's arm of the DAR and the SAR, and I was involved in that. I became the state president. I don't know, I was probably in late high school when I became state president. Then I started going to the national conventions, which were a big deal at the time and might still be, I don't know, in Washington, D.C., and I ran for um, an office, national vice president of the Mid Southern region. So I won that, and then I ran for national recording secretary, and I was that. And that was maybe early college. I don't know, but what I will tell you about that is how that shaped me. Is I met a lot of lifelong friends with whom I still correspond and consider really close friends who are not from here.
Right.
People in Chicago, all over the place. Just and I was able in the summers was able to travel. They had regional meetings. So I was able to travel, and I was 16 at that time because I remember my mom gave me the car. I had just gotten my life, and I went off with like 5 other teenagers, and I was the driver. I mean, that was kind of an interesting thing because I wouldn't have done
That is,
that
oh goodness,
with
no.
Ellen. I would never, and I mean, I went literally to South Dakota. I went, started
Wow.
out in Tennessee, I can't remember all the places, but there were, I think, 9 different places we went. So that was a big thing for me at the time. So CAR, um, uh, Red Cross,
The Arts Commission.
Arts Commission, yes. Um, uh, Comprehend Now. That's a more recent.
And like you said, Comprehend was Harriet's baby.
Yes, it was.
Why?
Uh,
And
I,
explain what
I can
Comprehend is.
I can tell you why I believe this was another cause of hers that I was kind of involved in just by default, was handicapped children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. She was involved in Easter Seals, and she took kids to She was on the state board of Easter Seals, and so she transported a lot of local kids to Camp Cassock, which was in Carrollton near General Butler State Park. I don't know if it still exists or not, but it was the Kentucky Easter Seal Society camp, and I would go with her. So I knew all these kids, and when I went to it was called SEA, Special Education Association at the time. I knew all those kids at Fee, which is where I was 7th and 8th grade, because I've been in my mom's station wagon with them. So that was always a big thing with her, and mental health. She always had a cause. And as far as Comprehend, one of the things was Holton had gone to Vietnam, and he came back from Vietnam, and some people, I can't remember the exact thing, but he was an electrician in the Air Force, and somebody needed some electrical work done, and were not able to afford it, and it was a house out in the county, and he went to help them with their problem, whatever. Mom sent him, go out there and help these people, And when he came home, he said, Mom, they had a person in a cage. And it was it was somebody, Mom was like, oh, this can't happen. And that was part of the impetus for, getting help for people, not only mental health, but that kind of thing. That is something that Comprehend does that nobody else in this area does.
And the fact that Comprehend isn't just nationally recognized, it is internationally recognized.
Yes. Well, and when she got a group together to get Comprehend going in 5 county, the state wanted them to join with Northern Kentucky, and that was before we were as identified with Northern Kentucky as we are now. They didn't even have NKU or anything then. It was Cincinnati.
Yes.
Northern Kentucky was Cincinnati. Now that we are more mobile and have the AA, and but anyway, she was like, no, that's too far. Our people are not going to travel there to get mental therapy or help with their children. So she insisted that it be here. And, the rest is history. We're here, and we're serving a 5 county area. And so, anyway.
And, of course, the face of behavioral health is different now than it used to be.
That's exactly right. It was not, and I always tell people this, it was not popular. Not that it's real popular, but it really was an unpopular. People didn't see the importance.
Yeah.
But if you have somebody in your family, you see the importance. Who needs help, whether it's mental health or you have an intellectually or developmentally disabled child, you realize how important it is.
And just humanity, the empathy.
Yes. Well, and that is the thing. That's exactly right. That's what Ann Brammer was telling. She was the city clerk when Mom was the mayor, and she always tells me stories about the people who came in, and Ann would say, Miss Cartmell, don't do that. They need help. And I can remember Thanksgiving and Christmas, people showing up at our door. It didn't matter who it was or what they needed. She would help them, whether it was come in and have dinner with us or my children need toys. Here's some Rebecca. Here's what Rebecca got for. That not really, but kind of, but sort of.
Wow.
Anyway, she really did have empathy, and I don't know, different bird.
Well, let's talk about the newer generation. Now, you're the baby, aren't you?
I'm the baby.
You're the baby. Talk about your brothers.
Holton's the oldest, and he is about 8 years older than, let's see, he's born in 40, 8 years older than I. David is 6 years older, and he has never gotten over the fact that he was the baby for 6 years, and he's never gotten over it. Interesting.
But talking about the political, because your brother was mayor of Maysville for 2 decades.
Yes, exactly,
and
20 years.
And during that time, he developed connections with the state and across the country, and received a lot of national awards.
Yes.
Like I mentioned, Matt Wallingford always likes to say we like to punch outside our weight class.
Yes.
And Maysville really does.
That really is true.
And I think your family had a lot to do with it.
I would like to think you're right. And I think you are. And it's funny, Ellen, my daughter, who is working in Frankfurt, but she'll, at least once a week, she'll say, I ran into somebody and they heard my name and they're like, do you know David? And she said a few of them will remember my grandmother, my mom. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah. Just,
And your brother has, David has like an encyclopedic memory
He
of
really
the
does.
history.
And that's who I call. I will like, now what was here, or what year was this, or who. He always knows, and he's right. I mean, that's the
But of course, not trying to date you guys or anything.
right.
But it was back at a time where you didn't just pull out the phone and ask Siri or
Right,
Google
exactly.
what the answer to something is.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Uh huh.
Now talk
Yeah.
about
Okay.
talk about your immediate family. Talk about your hubby,
Okay.
your daughter, fur babies that you may have.
Yeah. Well, that's true. I do have two. Right now, we have 2 dogs and 2 cats, and they're wonderful. And they all came. Well, the dogs came from the Mason County Animal Shelter, and the cats just kind of showed up and became
Now
part
I
of the
noticed
family.
when I said talk about your immediate family, you went to the critters before you did.
Of course I did. Of
Yeah,
course
okay.
I did.
As you should.
Absolutely. Let's talk about what's important here. I will talk about Ellen a little bit because she has the Red Cross connection also. She worked for the International Red Cross in Geneva right out of school. She did that, and she is on the Bluegrass chapter board. So she's involved in Red Cross in several of their initiatives and has stayed involved. She is working in Frankfurt for the Department of Public Health, and is very passionate about that and her causes. And Bernard is retired from GE and Ethicon in Cincinnati. He commuted pretty much every day, and so he's retired and he's here, and now he is my number one person for the food pantry. If something needs to be picked up, or you know what I mean, he runs to Kroger and Walmart and meets people, and is really an integral part of how that works, how the food pantry and community care of Mason County work.
Okay, I'd like you to confirm or deny. I was at the first training meeting for Green Dot Maysville.
Yes.
Which, for anybody who isn't familiar, Green Dot is bystander intervention.
Correct.
And I happened to see your daughter there.
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, it's really nice to see you here. What's going on? Well, Mom told me I needed to show up here. Other people volunteer. With Mom, it's being voluntold.
I'm sure that's true. Well, or at least I will have to say I try to make her aware of things where I think she could have a positive impact.
With a gentle nudge.
Yes, with a gentle nudge, yeah. And usually she's pretty good about, doing it.
She just wipes the boot print off her back, and off she goes.
Exactly.
You've got to be proud of your entire family.
I am.
What
I
a
really
legacy.
Am. Yeah. Actually, yes, I am. Of course, my grandmother was the only grandparent I knew. All of the grandparents were gone except for Beck Horde before any of us were born. I mean, my father's parents were gone, so she was our only grandparent, and she was a force with whom to be reckoned, and a big part of our lives. I know I didn't talk about her that much, but yeah, she was very involved, and
I know you were talking about military. I'm going to kind of use a military phrase. Failure just was not an option for your family, was it?
That's true. And sometimes I'll say this about my giving up or quitting is not, even sometimes when maybe giving up and also not taking no for an answer. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Well, yeah, obviously sometimes you do take no for an answer, but
you don't have to like it.
Right, you don't have to like it, and I try not to. I try to make things. And that's the way Mom was, and my grandmother, same thing. Just characters.
What do you think about the town's revitalization? It seemed like downtown pretty much died when Walmart went to the top of the hill. But now you see a reinvention with specialty shops and different things downtown.
Yes.
And of course, living down here, you've got to live through it.
Right. I have lived through it, and I said this early. Downtown was my playground. I mean, I was in the dime store every day, probably looking at the chickens or the little fake watches or whatever. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Literally every day. Those people the people who worked there were my playmates. So, and the Al drugstore and the Kilguses and all those things. I just think about how much time I spent downtown as a little kid, and I'm thrilled about the revitalization. I think it's wonderful. I know Mom predicted that when Walmart came, that's what would happen, and it did. And I think it has come back beautifully. Is it perfect? We're working on it. You know what I mean? I love this town. I love downtown. I think it's just an absolutely wonderful place. I think the things that we have here, most small towns don't have.
True.
And I always say this. And you're going to be talking to somebody later, but I attribute a lot of that. Some of the things we have, the Y, the Boys Club, a super duper hospice, you know what I mean? I attribute to the Brownings. I mean, to the generosity of local families, and the Brownings being really a big one. That now as far as just people who love the town and love the, I don't know.
And of course, you've got the museum.
Yeah, and I didn't even say the museum, and I should have, because that's the biggest thing. I mean, yes, the museum, even before the miniatures, was so impressive, and then you add the miniatures to that, a world class. Just this place is incredible.
And the research library.
Yes, well, that's what I say. That's what we had before the miniatures, and of course it's grown. And all of that is...
And the museum uses a phrase, and I have still been trying to find who it was who coined it, before tomorrow becomes yesterday, which I think sums it up perfectly.
Yes.
Because I call it recollection of collections, or a collection of recollections. Because once this generation goes, because not that many people are interested in preserving the history.
Right, that's the unfortunate part. They go, oh, it's too bad they tore that down or got rid, and of course I've been hearing that all my life, So I'm one of those people. It's like, you'll be sorry that you got rid of that, or
yes,
So yeah. I don't know, but the museum is probably one of and just some of the buildings and the Cox family, all the Cox buildings, so to speak, or buildings tied to the Cox,
the Russell Theater, if we can ever get it restored.
Yes.
Fingers and toes crossed.
Hope that. But even when I was at the Opera Theater the other night, the Brownings. I mean, the fact that we have that incredible theater.
Yes. And
I've been in theaters in New York that are not as big or as nice. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, gosh, we have this at home. So just a really, really incredible place. And
something everybody always talks about, seeing people perform either through the church choir, the community choir, through the Maysville Players. We have 2 new theater groups that are in the region.
Yes.
And we just have so many talented people.
We really, and always have. There's a lot of talent here, and a lot of talent who have gone on to big things
Yes.
started here.
Now,
So-
you were talking about you just attended Maysville's Got Talent a couple
Yes,
weeks ago.
Yes.
What were some of the things that were showcased?
They had rock bands. They had a couple of what I would call rock bands, soloists, dancer. They had a couple of dancers. A guy who kind of combined his guitar playing and singing with comedy, which all really good. Trying to think if there was and another person who kind of did a skit with her, beautiful voice, but kind of put a skit in with it. So just really a lot of talent. Yeah.
And, talking about bands, one of the people I have on my list is Grant Felice.
Yes.
And I remember we were doing fundraisers for Relay for Life.
Uh-huh.
And he had a band showcase, called up all of the bands that he knew, and I had no idea there were so many bands around. And he ended up getting together about 16 bands.
Wow.
And they all did 3-song sets, and it started early in the afternoon and then went till late at night. And it was just amazing how much talent that we have.
Yes.
And again, that so many people showed up. There are so many things that this town can be proud of.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Now, we've talked a lot. Is there anything else that hits you top of your head? Because I know as soon as I turn the cameras off, there'll be 50 million questions.
That's right. That's right.
But that's all right. I'm planning on having you back again.
Well, that's all right. And you know, I've been all over the place as far as beginning to end and whatever. I was thinking about this last night. My grandmother and my mother and father and I all graduated from Maysville High School, which I think is kind of cool. You know, trying to think, and you know, aunts and uncles too. I don't know. And my aunt and both parents and I all graduated from UK. Not that doesn't have to do with Maysville, but just things. I lived in Louisville for 10 years, which between that and that CAR thing where I met people from all over the place, one thing that I think that did for me, living somewhere else for a little while and then coming back, and having friends from other places and spending a lot of, you see that there are people who do things differently, and sometimes it's better, or well, that's all subjective or whatever. But I did learn that there are different ways to do things, and a lot of them I'm so glad I learned. You know, just so that's just something I think about often. That was an opportunity that I had that I think made a difference in how I am, maybe.
Well, thank you for being you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Been talking with Rebecca Cartmell, and I'm sure that I'm going to have more questions, so you'll see her in front of the camera again very soon. In the meantime, thanks again.
Thank you.